All right. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for joining us from your place on campus or your remote workplace. My name is Annalisa Tombelli, and on behalf of the Thrive Professional Development Committee, I am so pleased to welcome you today to a conversation with Provost Lynn Miranda. Before we jump in, I invite everyone to mute themselves for the best listening and engagement experience possible if you are not already muted. We received many thoughtful questions through the RSVP process and have incorporated as many as possible into today's event. If you have additional questions for Provost Miranda, however, throughout the meeting, I would invite you to use the chat feature and chat your questions directly to Kara Primer or Dawn Foster, two of our PD&N committee members who will field them whenever possible. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Thrive President Kate Gary. Kate Gary is Director of Communications and Marketing for the College of Arts and Letters. She is a member of the Dean's Executive Team and the college's Committee on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Kate, thank you so much, and over to you.
Thank you, Annalisa. Today we are so pleased to welcome Provost Lynn Miranda, the Charles and Jill Fisher Provost of the University of Notre Dame and the newest member of Thrive Steering Committee. I suspect many of you have read her bio, so I will just touch on a few of the high points before we start our conversation. Lynn graduated with highest honors from Duke University, where she majored in mathematics and economics and was named a Truman Scholar. She earned her master's and doctorate degrees from Harvard University, where she held a National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship. She later served as Dean of University of Michigan School of Natural Resources and Environment, and most recently, before joining Notre Dame, she was provost at Rice University. Though she did not officially become provost here until July 1st, Lynn has been actively engaged with the university's response to the COVID-19 pandemic since March. Lynn is the fifth person to serve as provost at Notre Dame, the first woman to do so, and the first to become provost in the middle of a global pandemic. So maybe that's a good place to start. Do you always choose to take on such big challenges?
Well, there's actually a funny story about that between my husband and myself. So the leadership positions that I've taken on previously, there were always sort of major things that needed to be addressed, that needed to be fixed. And my husband, when we were talking seriously about the Notre Dame situation, which I was really excited about, he said, but, remember, you do really well in a situation where there's a big thing that needs to be addressed, a big thing that needs to be fixed. Are you going to have that at Notre Dame? And I said, maybe I think I'm ready to go someplace where I don't have that, where I can focus on, from the very beginning on bigger visionary things for the institution, et cetera. And I accepted the job offer from the University of Notre Dame. It was announced on March 17th. It was announced on St. Patrick's Day, but I accepted it actually the week that was spring break here at Notre Dame. And so, really before we knew how big of an issue the pandemic would be. And so then I accepted, and then the pandemic hit, and my husband was sort of like, oh, well, I guess that worked out.
I can't imagine starting at a more challenging time than that. So as you know, from joining our steering committee, Thrive is an employee resource group focused on recruiting, retaining, and advancing the careers of women here at Notre Dame. So we always are excited to hear about the career journeys of women in leadership and gain some insights from women such as yourself. Can you tell us a little bit about your career path and how you got started in higher education?
Sure. So when I was a graduate student, I was pretty determined that I was not going to go into academia. I was very clear with my dissertation advisor about the fact that while academia was just the right place for him, it wasn't really the right place for me. I was going to go work for the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund. And And he kept saying to me, of all the students I've ever mentored, you belong in the academy. And I'd say, oh, that's really nice, Peter. I think you're projecting. And my last year of graduate school, I had a fellowship, but I was offered the opportunity to teach a course, not TA a course, but teach a course on my own. And I didn't really need to do it because I had a fellowship. I didn't need the money. And my dissertation advisor asked me to go ahead and teach the course as a favor to him. And really just because of the way that I was raised, we're immigrant, and, politeness is a big deal. Being deferential to the adults in your life was a big deal for me. And so really just because of the way I was raised, I agreed to teach this course. And I'm so glad that he pushed me in that way, because I spent, about a third of the way through the first class session of this course that I was teaching, I realized how much I love the classroom. And so I kind of at the last minute switched my job search strategy and ended up in academia. It was exciting for me to end up in academia. My first faculty position was at Duke, which was where I had done my undergraduate degree. So it was fun to teach at my alma mater. It was meaningful to teach at my alma mater. And I spent 21 years on the faculty there. I built a big research program. I did a lot of service in a lot of different places in the university. And then eventually was recruited to become a dean at the University of Michigan. I grew up in Detroit, so it was going to Michigan was like going home for me. I really enjoyed working there. And then later became provost at Rice in 2015. And I actually stepped down from that role. One of my kids got really sick, and one of my kids was diagnosed with cancer, and I just needed to be fully focused on her. And I didn't think there was a way, particularly at that university, I didn't think there was a way to be as focused on my family as I wanted to be, and do the job as provost that I felt the university deserved. So I stepped down, and now I'm here at Notre Dame, and I'm really happy to be here.
So what brought you to Notre Dame at this stage in your career, and how did you know that this was the right place for you and the right time for you to be at Notre Dame?
So first of all, we eventually got much better news about my daughter. She's doing really well now. She's a sophomore at Duke. So, being reassured that she was, she was okay, made it possible for me to think about, well, what did I want the next step to be? And I had an offer to, go join a university as a faculty member, leading some data science and health-related research areas at the university. And I had some other academic leadership possibilities, but a couple of things happened. So first of all, as I was going through my own process of discernment, one of the things I realized is that I quite like the role of provost. I really like all that connection to the faculty. I really like all that connection to the students. And I really like the connection to the graduate students also, not just the undergraduate students. And I think oftentimes presidents don't have that same connection to the graduate students. I really like the connection to the staff who are making things work. We all know within the academy, within departments, within colleges and schools that staff are so critical to making things work successfully. They understand so much of the local context, and if we work proactively to keep them connected with other people doing similar jobs in other departments, then the whole quality of the enterprise improves. And so I really like the job of provost. I had opportunities to be a president, and I I decided I had a lot of bandwidth, but I preferred using my bandwidth for being in a provost position. And Notre Dame is a special place. We have a family connection. My family was able to immigrate to the United States because of my a fellowship that the civil engineering department gave my my father when my family first immigrated here. I was born later after the family left South Bend. The emphasis on holistic formation is very appealing to me. We tend to talk about holistic formation when we're talking about educating undergraduates, but I actually think about holistic formation for all of us. I think that we're all in a constant process of discernment. I think we're all in a constant process of formation and reformation as we decide who we, how we want to grow and develop and who we want to be a year from now and 3 years from now and 5 years from now. And so bringing that notion of developing the mind and the spirit of mind, body, spirit of the whole community. I really like that. And I really like the fact that there's headroom. It's a great university, but it's not a university that says, we're done. We're happy with who we are right now and we're sticking to it. Change is always hard. So people are aspirational for the university, and I like that. It's still the case that change is always hard. So making progress on some things that are important will still be a challenge, as it is everywhere. But and I really, really, really like the snow. So that day that we had snow last week, I dragged my chief of staff, Jim Forbutt, outside, as soon as there was just enough snow on the ground, and we made a snowman, and we put that snowman on one of the pedestals on the stairwells up to the main building. So,
oh, that's great.
I'm happy to be back in the Midwest. I'm happy to be back at a place where I can't reliably count on snow.
I think we're supposed to get snow this week too.
Yes, we are.
My first grader is very excited about that. He wants to break out the snow pants for the year. So you talked a little bit about formation and how we're always in a process of formation. And so I'm just wondering, like, looking back at your career journey, like, what are some moments that were really pivotal for you, that really helped make you the person you are today, inform your values and how you approach your work and your family? And how did you find your voice when you ran into obstacles or challenges through your career journey?
Okay, that's a lot of questions rolled into one. I don't know. I'll try to get to the full suite of what you've asked about. So I already talked about the pivotal point about my decision to go into academia when I didn't think that I would be doing that. I think another pivotal point was when I was approached about the deanship at the University of Michigan. I actually wasn't looking for an academic leadership position. I had a really great research program. It was well funded. It was a couple $1 million a year in external funding coming through, a big research group of like 30, really productive in terms of publications. Loved my teaching, like nothing was broken. And when I was approached by a headhunter about the job at the University of Michigan, it got me thinking about the transition you make from being a faculty member to an academic leader. And the big part of that transition is, as an individual faculty member, you have your ideas and you have your colleagues, whether it's a teaching colleague or a research colleague, and your job is to try to advance those ideas. When you're in academic leadership, your job is to really listen to everybody around you and hear all of their ideas and see ways to connect people to each other and connect ideas and advance a whole community's set of ideas. And so it's like this fundamental pivot from being internally focused on advancing your own ideas to being others focused and helping the whole community to advance their ideas. And when approached by the headhunter, I realized I was ready for that kind of transition. And really, really wanted it. And so I have grown into, so I have from the beginning loved the focus on other people's ideas. I've grown into understanding how to do that more and more effectively. I don't claim that I do it, super well. I claim that I know that it's important and I work really hard at it, and I'm better at it today than I was 5 years ago, and I'm better at it today than I was yesterday, right? So that's like a continuous process of improvement for me. I would say the other probably most pivotal moment was my decision to step down from the provostship at Rice. There's this phrase that people use, work-life balance, and I really, really dislike that phrase. Balance, I like, but the reason I dislike the phrase work-life balance is that my work is part of my life. It's deeply important to me. It has, the values that guide me as a person also guide my research program. They also guide how I try to be in this office of the provost. So I never think about it as balancing work against my life. I think it's all really combined. I think it's about balancing all the different components of your life that are important to you. While it was a pivotal decision, it wasn't a hard decision to step down. It was really clear to me what I needed to do for my daughter. But I'm guessing at least some of you, if not many of you on the Zoom have children, and you know that sense of, there are times when your child needs you because nobody makes macaroni and cheese like you do. I don't actually make macaroni and cheese. Nobody makes chicken pot pie. I make a mean chicken pot pie. It's actually a spicy chicken pot pie. There's that kind of need, and then there's this other, much deeper emotional need. And it was very clear to me what the right thing to do was in that situation, and it was clear, and it wasn't hard.
Did it change how you approached work and life when you were choosing to return after stepping away to take care of your daughter? Did that whole experience change the way that you see your work and your life, or did you already feel like that description that you just gave us was kind of there all along in terms of how you see work and life
Well, how I see work and life, that, my work being part of my life, I would have said the same thing about disliking the work-life balance phrase 20 years ago. In fact, I have I have in public talks said that very thing. What I think there were a couple of things that changed for me with that decision. So any of you, and I'm guessing some of you have, who have gone through an experience like that, there's like one of your children being really sick like that, where you're worried about, is she going to be with us a year from now or 3 years from now? It makes you even better at setting priorities and figuring out what you really need to do today, this week, this month, this year, this 3 years, this 5 years. And so I'm actually kind of known in the main building as like being a baker, and which is kind of funny because the reason I started baking as much as I do is that when my daughter was undergoing chemo, she on the day that she had chemo, she was completely wiped out. The day after, she was completely wiped out. The day after that, about halfway through the day, she'd kind of rise from bed and she'd come down and I would, we'd sit on the couch and she'd put her head on my shoulder and I'd put my iPad in front of us and we watched the Great British Baking Show together.
Love that show.
And then she always had chemo on Tuesdays. And then by Saturday or Sunday, there would be something that we would decide to try. And it was like, we bonded over it. It was a way of pacing the week that was helpful to her. So 5 years ago, no one would have said, oh, Marilyn's a baker, but now everybody in main building and some people in other areas of the university think of me that way. The other thing I would say about it is many people have said to me, as you did when you started this conversation, like, what a way to start a new job. And, I could have been quite happy starting a new job with, fewer things flying at you at 500 miles an hour. That could have been nice, but nothing that happened this year so far, nothing is even in the same universe as the years when she was sick, when my daughter was sick. It's not hard like that. And so it gives you this, when you sit in the infusion suite, it's like you're in a club with the other parents, particularly for me, the other moms whose children have cancer. And there's nothing that COVID-19 has thrown at me in my role as provost or in me as my role as a researcher or as a faculty member or a member of this community. Nothing that COVID has thrown at me that seems it's not even in the same universe as being as hard as those years when Viviana was not well.
Yeah. So it sounds like it gave you a lot of perspective. I'm gonna,
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. You also figure out a way to find humor all the time. I mean, I've always tried to be a joyful person and find happiness and laughter wherever. And if you have to figure out how to do that in the middle of that situation, as my husband and I did with our daughter, you can still find some humor in the middle of everything that's going on with COVID, and humor as a way, not a mocking humor, a shared experience kind of humor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like we're all kind of looking for those moments of joy and humor as we try to navigate this. It's certainly not anywhere near as difficult as what you had to go through, but I hear what you're saying there. So one of the questions that I have, and that we had a lot of people have interest in, is around priorities. And one of the things that you did as provost at Rice was really prioritize increasing the gender and racial diversity of the faculty and the academic leaders, and resulted in substantial increases in underrepresented minority and women faculty at that institution. Can you tell us a little bit about how you went about doing that? What were some of the biggest obstacles, and what were some of the solutions that you found to actually work well in trying to recruit and not just recruit, but also retain and advance the careers of underrepresented groups at Rice? Yeah.
So I would say the first obstacle that you ran into were the sort of common trope of, we would hire women and minorities for these faculty positions if there were good people out there. And so that's a common trope. It was interesting to me, no, it was not if there were good people out there. It was, we're not going to compromise quality for the sake of diversity. That was the phrase that was used most commonly there. And, that's an interesting phrase to throw out at your first female ever provost, first person of color ever provost, first executive officer of the university, person of color ever. That's an interesting statement to make out loud to me. And I would oftentimes just let people say that and then let it sit with them without responding, and give them an opportunity to, sort of go, wait, what did I just say? And so there was that trope, but there, so I think one of the issues there, here at most universities, is this: people have this idea that about what racist means. And racist means terrible things. It means the Ku Klux Klan, and it means using terribly derogatory terms to describe people, and it means doing physically harmful things toward people because of who they are, and so they know that's what their conception of racist is. And it's actually okay with me if that's the conception of racist. And I don't think it's actually productive to try to redefine that. But instead, what I like to try to redefine is, I'm going to grant you that you're not racist. I'm going to grant you that you're not doing these things that we all would say are awful. But what I want you to be is anti-racist, right? So I want you not just to say, well, I'm not going to do those things, but to proactively say, I am going to do these things. And so what I found at Rice, and what I'm finding here, is that people have very, very good intentions. They want things to be better, and they do not have a toolkit.
Right.
And one of the jobs of the provost's office is to help provide that toolkit. So how do you think about doing a faculty search differently? How do you think about doing faculty visits to campus, faculty candidate visits to campus differently? How do you think about the package that you offer differently? How do you think about once people walk through the door, so you've welcomed them into your house, do you actually fully welcome them into your house so that they feel that they belong there the way that everybody else belongs there? So it's not just increasing the numbers, it's making sure that the students and the faculty and the staff that we recruit, whether it's women or people of color or people with different gendered identities, et cetera, that they feel comfortable and welcomed here. So there's a toolkit for all of that. And one of the biggest points in recruiting faculty or recruiting graduate students or recruiting undergraduate students, this phrase that I use all the time is, well, you don't just eat the fish that wash up on the beach. You actually have to go fishing. And I've been using that phrase for a long time. And now that I'm at a Catholic university, it's a super appropriate phrase to use. So you have to proactively, you can't just sort of assume, like, I put that ad out there and then, Black faculty will apply or Black students will apply. You have to be much more proactive about all of that. And there are a lot of specific things. So I'll just give one specific thing in faculty recruiting as an example, but there are dozens of these tools in the toolkit that are available. So I actually said this in my interview the first time I met Father John, and you'll see why it's funny. So I said, I have this theory that in the 1950s, God herself came down and said, when there is a faculty search, there shall be 3 finalists. And it's like the 11th commandment. And we've been doing it like that for 70 years, where we bring 3 finalists. And I said during my interview, there is nothing sacred about the number 3. Oops, I started laughing as soon as I said it out loud. I was like, well, there is, but not when it comes to faculty recruiting. So one of the things that we said in faculty recruiting was, you don't have to be limited to 3 faculty recruits, invite 5. And the provost office will pay for the extra 2. We'll pay for the cost of the visit for the extra 2. And so then what happened is, like, people had their known networks, their known way of recruiting people, and they selected 3 of those 5 the way that they always did. And then they had 2 more degrees of freedom, and they were willing to sort of like think, well, maybe it would be okay to invite someone who comes from a ranked number 30 program instead of ranked in the top 20. Maybe it would be okay to recruit someone who was at a lesser university, but was at that university not because they weren't as well qualified to be here, but they were there because of a family concern that took them to that particular location. So they had these 2 extra degrees of freedom. And what we found is that when people invited 5 instead of 3, the pool of finalists was much more diverse. And then, and I didn't make any requirements that if you want to have 5, there have to be more, there has to be more diversity in the pool. But given those extra degrees of freedom, we tended to get more women candidates coming through. We tended to get more minority candidates coming through. And, then these people were just so exquisitely good that they were impossible to resist. So we didn't make any, there were no quotas, there were no requirements that, that you have to hire minority, you have to hire women, but just giving people the tool of increasing the overall pool in the first place, and there's a whole set of tricks for that, but then also changing the composition of the finalists pool really led to completely different outcomes. And we did the same thing in leadership searches. So we hired the first African-American dean ever at the university. He's actually now taken over the provost job there. I feel really proud about that. Picked a good one. We hired the first Mexican-American dean ever at Rice. And this is in Houston, right? It should be easy for us to attract minority leaders in Houston because it's such a diverse city. So
yeah, I love your fishing analogy. I know that you enjoy fishing. But I do think that there's a tendency at Notre Dame to say like, oh, we'll just put the ad out and we're Notre Dame and everyone's gonna come to us, and really being proactive about searching and not just sifting through who applies is important. But I'm so excited to hear more of your toolkit and get a chance once we get out of crisis mode here a little bit to see those tools roll out. I know everyone in Thrive was so excited to hear that diversity and inclusion are one of your big priorities here at Notre Dame as well. And so one of the questions is sort of like, what do you think success is going to look like here in that way around diversity and inclusion? And I heard you talk earlier about accountability in this. And so what are the ways that we can see some like measurable success here at Notre Dame? There's a lot of talking the talk, and how do we get to the point where we're looking more like we're walking the walk as well?
Yeah. So for any number of years, this way of like setting goals and then having metrics against which we measure our progress toward those goals, that's how my research team has been operating for a long time. But there's this formalization of that in a process called OKRs, Objectives and Key Results. Probably the best known book about this is John Doerr's book, Measure What Matters. John and Ann Doerr are actually friends of mine. So I had an opportunity to kind of pick their brains all that much more about the approach. And we have in the Provost office now something, not OKRs, we call them OKRAs, which is Objectives and Key Results for Academia, because OKRs were developed in Silicon Valley where there is very much a, quarterly P&L bottom line orientation. And in the academy, we only hire on an annual basis. We only admit students on an annual basis. So you have to think about your objectives and key results a little bit differently. So I have top line objectives and key results. There are 5 objectives. I know what they are right off the top of my head: diversity, equity, and inclusion, improving the strength and quality of our graduate programs, improving the research environment, improving the research environment for all faculty, and students, as well as the staff, the research technicians, all those people, ensuring that we have we maintain excellence in our undergraduate program, and coming through COVID a better university. We don't want to just survive COVID. We want to thrive at the end of COVID, right? But those they're in that order. That's a clear, there's ordering to that. So those are the 5 objectives. I know them off the top of my head. Everybody who works with me knows them off the top of their head. And then there are some key results underneath it. For diversity, equity, and inclusion, we simply, first of all, we simply need to get the numbers up. Like I totally get that we have to improve the climate here for people of color, for, women on the faculty, for women in leadership positions, for women on the staff, for the LGBTQ community. I totally get that we have to improve the climate, but part of improving the climate is we just don't have enough critical mass. So we have to get numbers up. So under key results, we have, increasing the number of, making progress on these numbers for both undergraduate students and graduate students. For staff, but staff, it's not staff in the aggregate, it's staff along the different levels of staffing, so that we have people of color and women in leadership positions, and it's increasing diversity amongst the faculty, and then it's improving the climate for all of those groups. And there are numerical goals assigned to them. And then, so that's like the master list. And then on that master list, different associate provosts and different deans are sort of part and parcel of achieving those key results. And so then they have their own set of objectives and key results, which are meant to help achieve that. So all of us, all of the deans, all of the associate provosts and vice presidents are working towards, so that's like the whole reporting structure up through the provost's office. Everybody's working towards these 5 objectives, and each of those 5 objectives have measurable goals, and there's accountability where there are milestones, and we say, like, okay, it's 3 months in, how much are we on the right track? And every 3 months, I try to do like a red, yellow, green. Are we on the right track or not? It's okay not to be on the right track. It doesn't mean that, you get, the responsibility gets taken away. It means, okay, if we're not on the right track, what do we need to do differently? Let's evaluate that, and let's help each other get better at it.
Yeah. One thing, I actually have a lot more questions around diversity, but I know that we're running out of time, and I want to be sure I get to some of the other topics that people had submitted. And mentoring is something that we're really focused on in Thrive. And one thing that I thought was so remarkable is that you have this research team that's come along with you as you move from university to university, which I think says a lot about your leadership. And so I'm really curious about what your approach is to mentoring and coaching the people on your team, and what your philosophy is on that, and what you think has really been a difference maker in terms of mentoring.
So on my research team, I would say there are a few key elements. One of them is that we make sure that we're giving everybody meaningful work. So the focus of the team is on questions that are deeply important. It's all on children's environmental health. So these are very compelling questions to everybody on the research team. They care about the answers. They, every project we work on is basically about something terrible happening to children, and they want that to change. So we give them meaningful and important work. So that's a big part of it. The second thing is that we are, I try to compensate people on my research team well and fairly, so that they don't feel like they're having to make a trade-off between doing meaningful work and taking care of their families. And the third thing I would say is that we're a really family-friendly group. So I know the children of all the people who work for me, in non-COVID days, we get together as a group. I'm blessed that I've had some members of my research team follow me from Duke to Michigan to Rice to here. That's been critical to my keeping my research program going. They're also like my safe, happy place. So there are people on my research team who take care of the administrative components of running a research team. I make sure I raise enough grant money to be able to cover all of that, so that when I'm with my research team, I get to spend, I would say, 90% of my time focused on the questions that are most important to us there. So that and so even though they don't get that much of my time the way that they did when I was a full-time faculty member without these other responsibilities, the time that they get from me is fully focused on these things that are really important to them as well.
Yeah. Well, and I think that kind of gets back to what Notre Dame is all about too, is that, being a force for good in the world and feeling like the research that you're doing is answering those important questions. So have you had any mentors that gave you really great advice that impacted the way that you approached mentoring your own team members, or that has really changed the way that you live out your professional life?
I've had a lot of really good mentors. I've had some people who were like awful people in my life who taught me what not to do also. But I have sought mentors regularly. I think that there's we use the term mentoring all the time. There's also this notion of coaching, right? So even the best athletes work with coaches to get better at certain things. So I've had a whole string of them when I was an undergrad, when I was a graduate student, when I was an assistant professor, through the ranks. Right now I have, I continue that practice. So and there's like this, one of the things that happens in my research group is that we have this vertical integration that everyone is both mentored and mentors. So, the college students mentor the high school students, and the graduate students and the postdocs mentor the undergraduates, and, it kind of goes up and down. And I actually always encourage people to, find people who you can trust, who will talk frankly with you, be willing, make sure that they're not talking frankly with you because they're actually destructive people. This is why I say I've had experience with, people who have said and done truly horrible things. Make sure there are people who, actually are concerned about your best interests. Listen to them even when they're telling you things that are hard. And just sort of be continuously open to that, and then pay that forward to others who come to you for that kind of help and guidance.
So I heard that you have a talk that you've given before on the 10 habits of reasonably sane working mothers, and that really resonated with me, because I feel like reasonably sane is maybe the best I can hope for some days. Can you tell us, are there any top tips from that you think would be important to share with our group?
Yeah. So this comes from, there's this very famous book that's sold millions and millions of copies called 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And so it's my play on that, the 10 Habits of Reasonably Sane Working Mothers. And the so one tip is manage your calendar. Don't let it manage you. So figure out what your priorities are and then map that onto your calendar. Don't let your calendar set your priorities for you. And you can kind of go through that formally. So when I have my 5 key objectives, and when I look at my calendar and I say, how well is the way that I'm spending time mapping onto what I'm saying my most important things to do are? And if you, we will all be in a constant process of drift where you're really well mapped and then a bunch of things happen and then suddenly you're not well mapped. And so regularly kind of saying, wait a minute. And I have the great good fortune of having Carmen Leichte help me keep my calendar mapped to, what I've said is important. Another one is, so these are twin pointers. One is never apologize for being a parent. So the classic example I see, and anytime I see it, I take that person aside and say, don't ever do that again. You don't ever have to do that again. So it's like, oh, we'd like to have this meeting at 7:30 on Thursday. Is everybody available? And then somebody says, well, I'm sorry, that's my day to take the kids to work. I could, maybe work out with my husband. Could we switch dates? Or, could we switch dates? Or, and they kind of go on and, it's especially important because, it's a new and it's like, stop. The answer to that question is, I'm sorry, I have a prior commitment at 7:30 on Thursday. You don't have to apologize for being a parent. You don't ever have to apologize. And you certainly should never apologize for being a parent at a Catholic university. And the other thing is, never apologize for working, right? So I worked full-time. We have 3 children. I worked full-time. My husband worked full-time. There were a lot of things that I'm so grateful to the moms who were able to be the room parents and, those sorts of things. And I know that our family benefited from their willingness to do that. I always tried to express my gratitude to them in whatever ways that I could. And I always tried to take on things that I could do. So I actually chaired, when my kids were younger, I chaired the school improvement team at the elementary school for 4 years, and at the high school, I was on that. I didn't chair that because all that work was in the evenings, and it was, so I could still work a full day and then do a trade-off with Chris, that's my husband, about like, I'm going to go to this meeting and can you trade, we would trade off like that, right? So I never apologized to my children that I wasn't the room parent. And I would have been a terrible room parent. I spared them deep embarrassment, that I wasn't a room parent. On the other hand, we had a pet snake, and I borrowed a couple of snakes from other friends we knew who had pet snakes, and I came in and I was the mom who knew about snakes and let these little kids handle snakes. It was only one day that I went in. I wasn't a room parent, but man, that was like, put me in the super cool mom category. Oh, yeah. Because I took in the pet snakes. I could only do what I could do. And I couldn't apologize to my children, and I wasn't going to apologize to the teachers or to the school system. When my children were in elementary school, they went to a school where I was one of the only full-time working moms. And like getting into that habit of not apologizing to my children and not apologizing to the school about the fact that, I had this job. So.
Yeah, that's great. So I want to make sure that we have time to get some questions in from the audience that weren't included in the ones we ran through already. So I'm going to turn it over to Annalisa to moderate that piece. I'm sure we would love to listen to you all day, but you have lots of important things to get to, and everyone's got their calendar blocked out till 1. So let's try to get a couple of questions in from the group.
Great. Thank you so much, Kate. And thank you, Provost Miranda. We have some excellent questions. We have time for a few here. I'll start with this one. Decision-making often involves 2 parts, finding the solution and taking the action, which can be a slow process, and one which requires buy-in from all stakeholders. How would you advise those, in your experience, to develop both of those parts of decision-making, and how would you advise those on the call to garner buy-in and support from the teams that they need to carry out, for example, the OKRs that you mentioned?
Well, you have to have the community involved in developing the decisions, right? So when decisions sort of, just kind of get handed down from above, and you say make them happen, and people were not involved in the decision making, it's harder for them to understand why we're doing that, why it's important to do it, what the timeline for doing it, what doing it well means, etc. So getting a broad set of stakeholders involved in making the decisions, and the degree to which you do that varies depending upon what you have, the time that you have available. There have been any number of decisions regarding COVID-19 where I would have certainly preferred a much longer, deeper, richer consultative process, but it's like, we got to switch to remote instruction tomorrow. We just have to do that. So there are times when you can't do that, but if you're in the habit of generally doing it, when you don't do it, you have, people are more willing to give you grace. To sort of say, well, I don't think that person would have done it in the way that they did had there not been exigent circumstances. So, having that community buy-in around decision making becomes important. And so what happens is that if you do that, it takes longer to get to a decision, but it's shorter to get full and successful implementation of the decision, because people understand the what and the why and the how and the by when and the teamwork that's required better.
Great, thank you. That's excellent. We have another question here. You've mentioned kind of the attitude of seeking mentors and making decisions based on priorities. We have a question here about, when you are thinking about the staff of the university and the attitudes and postures that will, make them successful so that we can advance the mission of the university. What are some of those attitudes that you're hoping to see that you think will help us all achieve advancing the mission of the university at this stage?
Well, I think we have to make sure we start from the premise that, the staff are key partners in doing everything that we do at the university. So, this is just a little example. I don't know if anybody noticed it, but or even cared about it, but I cared about it. It was important to me. So those unrelenting and so annoying messages that we sent on a weekly basis, which probably drove you out of your mind. But originally the thinking around this was, well, we would send them to all the faculty, and then we would ask department chairs to forward them to whomever was relevant, on their academic staff. And I was like, no, no, we're not going to do that, because that is automatically treating the things that staff do as secondary to the things that faculty are doing. And particularly within the context of COVID, there were all kinds of things that staff were doing that that were a premise for faculty to do the things that they usually do, right? So I was like, yeah, we're not going to do that. We're going to, if this is only going to the academic side, then we're going to we'll send it to all the faculty and all the staff on the academic side. And so then one of the responses to that was, well, but that creates this, haves and have-nots between the academic staff and the non-academic staff. And I was like, well, it's great with me if we just send it to all faculty and all staff, let's do that. And, so all of those messages got sent to everyone. So that's, I don't know, there are larger attitudinal things, but there are also larger attitudinal, like shifting. Life is not like the movies where there's, some key moment where people who, thought one way about something all of a sudden heard a compelling speech or read something or met someone, and then all of a sudden they think this totally different thing. That's not what life is like. So life, I enjoy a good, a good, just not all that meaningful, fun movie myself, right? But that's not what life is like. Life is, people change incrementally. And so if we want to have a big effect on overall attitudes and overall ways of behaving, it's the same thing as that toolkit idea, right? Like, one by one, you have to introduce these things that say, here's how we're going to think about things. And another example of this is when we were debating debate is too strong of a word because we very easily came to the conclusion about the additional holidays. So originally it was just going to be the days around Christmas, and I said, especially if you want to, not to be overly gendered here, but especially if you want to, really express our gratitude to the women and women staff, we should give the Wednesday before Thanksgiving off. It was one of these things where the other people in the room were like, yeah, that's a good idea. And it wasn't a fight, it wasn't a battle, but there had to be someone in the room to say that, right? So you have to, and that's earlier Kate asked something and I never got to it about, finding your voice, finding the moments to make the points. And I don't pick every battle. And I don't fight a lot, but as a consequence, when I'm really sticking to a position that I've laid out there, people will pay attention to it, right? Because it's not, well, she fights about everything. It's sort of, my saying, and again, with the holidays, I don't want this to sound like there was any kind of a battle or a major debate or anything, but just sort of saying, wasn't it great to not have to work on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving? I was grateful for it. Maybe I just did it for myself. I don't know.
No, it was great. And I think that's one of those examples when having a more diverse group of people in the room that's making the big decisions matters. Like having people who are able to come at things from different perspectives and raise little suggestions or big suggestions that are just blind spots for other people. It makes a difference. And so that's why all of this work that we're doing around representation and diversity efforts, it matters.
Yep.
So we are running out of time here. I wish we could ask more questions, but I'm so grateful that you were able to carve out some time to speak with us today and to share your thoughts and insights. It was wonderful. And I think there were a lot of people who are going to be watching the video afterwards. And so it was a really inspirational conversation. Thank you so much. And thank you to the PD&N team for planning all of this, and to everyone who made time to show up today.
Yeah, so I'll just conclude by offering two thank yous. The first thank you is to those of you who organized this and those of you who attended for inviting me. It was a pleasure to be with all of you. I wish that, I wish we were in a big room and now I could walk around and meet you and talk with you and learn more about you and what you do and your families and your work and all that kind of stuff. So thank you for allowing me to be part of this. And the other thank you that I'll say is that, man, it was a heck of a semester. It was a heck of a semester. We made it through. We successfully kept our students in in-person education. And I know that, there are various times in those weekly letters where we call out, this group or that group, but really everything that happened was made possible by the good work of every member of our community. So I'm so grateful to all of you for everything you did for our students, everything you did for our faculty. And I hope that all of you will find some time to unplug and recharge and rejuvenate during this intersession period. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. For everyone else, I just want to give a quick plug. We have 2 upcoming events. One is holiday reading virtual lunch on December 10th, which is a moment to sort of relax and get together and enjoy the season. And we also have a presentation by LaTanya Ferguson from HR on 21st Century Networking, and that's going to be on January 26th. If you are not a member of Thrive, it's very easy to sign up on our website or just to check out all of our upcoming events. It's womenthrive.nd.edu. Thank you all so much for being here today.